Hello, kia ora, I'm Philip Duncan. It is Wednesday, the 12th of November. Thank you so much for joining me as we take a look at the weather forecast for the rest of this week, the weekend, and the start of next week. And as I said yesterday, it's a messy setup at the moment. High pressure east of New Zealand, low pressure developing to the north of us and sinking southwards. We've got a cold front in the Tasman Sea that's associated with a low just south of the South Island. And then we've got a storm here south of Tasmania. Different airflows with all these different systems. So at the moment, some parts of the North Island have a subtropical airflow, while at the end of the week, as we go towards Friday night, Saturday morning, subantarctic airflow is going to come in right over the top of the South Island. So it's a typical kind of spring setup this week with things all over the place. Here is the air pressure map, and it shows you what I mean. High pressure east of New Zealand. There is the low drifting down this evening into the top of the North Island. Low pressure south of New Zealand, and that storm south of Tasmania dredging up the colder airflow that's coming in by the end of the week. So with the high near New Zealand and the low pressure zones moving in, it means for windier weather. So these winds are already picking up around Northland, Auckland, eastern Waikato, Coromandel Peninsula, those areas, maybe Bay of Plenty. We'll be seeing those winds ramp up in some areas tonight, getting gusty and maybe into the gale force zone for a time as it moves down over the central part of the North Island. We've also got another windy area around sort of Otago Peninsula in particular, and around Dunedin, with the high nearby and the low moving in. A windy northeasterly is forecast for you as well. Temperatures, though, are pretty much up around New Zealand with more of a northerly airflow at the moment. Here is the wind gust map. This is overnight tonight, 1 in the morning tomorrow. What you're seeing here is sort of more of the purple, pink shading. You can see it here around the central plateau as well, getting up around that 100 kilometre an hour mark in the gusts that come through. So windy weather like around the eastern Waikato, around the western side of the Kaimai Ranges. That's one area. Windy weather coming straight into the Bay of Plenty. Obviously, as I just said, around the volcanic plateau as well, but really just sort of gusty weather moving through, right around parts of New Zealand as that low moves in, but some of the gustiest winds are shown here where it goes up and towards that pink-purple shading. As we go to 1 p.m. Thursday, 12 hours after that wind map, now the low is drifting down here in towards east of Canterbury, so that means a southerly change coming through once it moves on in, and a westerly for the top of New Zealand, driving in a few showers. Doesn't look too major for most places, but could still be a little bit windy here and there, and the odd downpour still remaining as it starts to clear away, drifting southwards. The next high coming out of Australia, but the polar blast I was telling you about, or the wintry change that's coming for the South Island on Friday, this is it here on Thursday, coming into Tasmania. So it starts on Friday into the later part of the day. Before that arrives, it's warmer in most places. In fact, in the South Island, the nor'wester, which will be coming out of Australia for a time, fairly mild as that moves on through, and a bit windy as well, especially in the very southwest corner where rain arrives later on. We're seeing showers around the top of New Zealand. You never know, one could be a little bit heavy as that moves on through, but generally rainfall isn't too big as we go through Friday. But some of these showers might be just a little bit heavy if you get some daytime heating with them. Large dry areas though, central New Zealand and almost all of the eastern side, at least all the way up to about East Cape, is dry. Now we've got cold air coming in Friday night and into Saturday morning. You'll see it in a moment when we show you the snapshot for Saturday with the air pressure maps. But purple means the chance of a frost. So we could be seeing some frost. Now look, that's mostly in the mountains and the ranges. But the blue does come down a little lower to lower elevation regions. At this stage, take a look at the frost forecast we've got at ruralweather.co.nz or in our free app. It shows you if you've got a frost chance. Some areas might just be marginal for a light frost. Otherwise, not a frost around the North Island or the top part of the South Island. So here is 1 o'clock Saturday. In fact, actually, this might just be a couple of hours earlier than that, around about sort of late morning going into lunchtime, because the polar boundary actually moves away into the afternoon. So get through to about 3 p.m. Most of that will be pushing out, maybe lingering in the east, but this is like a wave coming up into the beach and it's moving sideways at the same time. So it comes up and then it retreats by the time we get to the end of Saturday. So that means cold air comes into the South Island during Friday PM and Saturday AM. And then by the time we get to Saturday PM, a lot of that cold air will start to move away again. Cold front moves into the North Island with a few showers. As a result of that, you never know, could be an isolated downpour, heavier sort of squally shower from that. Otherwise, it doesn't look really too bad, but the temperature certainly down on Saturday morning around the South Island. By Sunday though, the polar boundary's gone and we're back to the temperatures lifting back up again, and it could be quite quickly for the South Island. Once you get a northerly wind coming on through, that wind will pick up as you go in towards nighttime, so that will help lift up the temperatures further. Light winds in the North Island on Sunday means maybe a bit of a cooler morning when you wake up following Saturday's weak cold front. It's not a very strong one, but really during the daytime should be fairly pleasant in most places. Now let's go into the start of next week. This is an enormous high pressure zone east of New Zealand. When you actually measure it out, it stretches for about 4,000 kilometres from the north to the south. So that is a very large area of high pressure that is building as we kick off next week, which means once more subtropical airflow coming back down into the country. And if you don't have that, you've got a windy nor'wester. But it looks as though almost everybody here has a subtropical airflow on Monday. So yeah, cold on Friday and Saturday in some places, but by the time you get to Monday, it's certainly going to be warm again, with rain arriving in the southern half of the west coast as we go through Monday, and that will pick up a little bit further going into Monday night in some areas, mostly just on the west coast there. As we go through to Tuesday, you can see what I mean about the size of this high. It goes right up to the tropical islands and goes all the way down just south of New Zealand. So that is a very large area of high pressure, and so that drags down warm subtropical winds around most of the country. And if you don't have that side of it, on the other side, if you track the origins, they're still coming out from around Vanuatu and New Caledonia. So really the whole country, pretty much the whole country, seeing those warmer winds. Just maybe some areas in the very south, maybe getting an airflow more so out of Tassie. So not quite as hot, perhaps, if you're living in Stewart Island, for example. But really, it's going to be a mild Tuesday around many parts of New Zealand, thanks to that big high. The next big high south of Western Australia, and a very large area of low pressure, 957 hectopascals there. So that's going to send another surge of spring weather into Tasmania, which means New Zealand, at least the South Island, has a chance of getting that as we go through into next week. Here's the next 4 days rainfall. So that includes the low that's coming down tonight and that cold front that's coming through on Friday, Saturday. Rainfall totals in some of these areas in the green and the blue, getting up around 40 to 60 millimetres, maybe even going higher than that. That's why the MetService have got some warnings and watches out at the moment. If you need rain in the east, there's a little bit that might spill over into Hawke's Bay, so fingers crossed you get a little bit more, but it might only be 5 millimetres in some areas. It's a little hit and miss once it comes over the mountains and ranges, and the driest part, the southeast corner there. So windy around Otago Peninsula today, mostly dry over the next 4 days ahead, just maybe a couple of showers coming through. Manawatu also looking quite dry there with the current setup. And that is all from me for today. A few moving parts with our weather forecast at the moment. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow, Thursday, as we take a closer look at the weekend and how next week is shaping up.